Hi, I'm Gary, and this is episode 262 of EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. And on the show today, we'll be looking at Everrati and their electric vehicle offerings. This season of the podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. Our main topic of discussion today is Everrati. Now, long-time listeners to the podcast will know that back in time, actually almost 30 years ago now, I used to drive Porsche 911s. Lovely cars, passed everything on the road apart from the petrol stations. Over a 10-year period, I had 3 of them, but my favourite had to be this bright red 964 model Targa Top. Actually, my favourite was the 996 in black that I had, but the car and I mutually agreed we weren't suited for each other one New Year's Day on a very wet, very narrow country road where I learned the hard way about wide tyres, powerful engines and aquaplaning. If you ever meet me in person, ask me about that story and I'll gladly tell you. Now, the 964 Targa Top was a lovely car with, as the name suggests, a section of roof between the front and rear windows that could be completely detached and stowed in the boot, which was the bonnet. Only useful for about 3 days of the summer and tended to leak slightly for most of the rest of the time, but I love the car anyway. So why am I talking about this on a show about electric vehicles? Well, it's because I thought my days of driving a Porsche 911 were over once I decided to forsake the internal combustion engine. Yes, Porsche have a couple of electric models, the Macan and the Taycan, and I've driven the Taycan on a track and a skid pan and a drag strip, and it's a very impressive piece of machinery. But a Porsche to me is always and has always been a 911 model. Low slung, rear engined, with a centrally located tachometer right in your eye line that showed how fast the engine was revving, not how fast the car was going. A gear shift below your left hand raised slightly higher than you are, and a neat small steering wheel with almost direct linkage to the wheels. There's nothing quite like that in the electric world. Also, I thought, at an event 18 months, a year, 2 years back, I saw a 964 Porsche in the Gulf oil livery sitting at an Instavolt charger, and naturally it piqued my curiosity. So I went over and sat in it and discovered it was a very faithful electric conversion of a 964 done by a company called Everrati. Naturally, I had to get Everrati on the programme to talk about this.
Of course, Gary, good to meet you. My name's Justin Lunny. I'm the founder and CEO of Everrati.
Fantastic. Now, tell me your particular, not the Everrati, but your particular EV origin story. What brought you personally to electric vehicles?
Yeah, probably like many fathers, I have a very large interest in my children's future. And I was certainly back in the sort of 2015 to 2014, 2015, looking at the awful situations in London, quite frankly, and children dying of lung diseases thanks to pollution. Also, my daughter, when she was sort of 7 or 8, had started worrying about the earth flooding, climate change more generally. So that was kind of my background. I had already run a couple of tech businesses. So I'd already built and sold some tech businesses. By around 2016, I exited. And then I saw Prince Harry and Meghan Markle driving away from Windsor Castle from their wedding in what was the first electric E-Type that you may recall, and that was done by Rimac. And that was really the inspiration for me. And since then, I've driven EVs, certainly for the last 4 to 5 years, as my daily cars. And in fact, I would call myself a recovering petrol head.
There's a lot of us around here, basically.
There is.
What are you driving at the moment?
I have a Porsche Taycan. I say for my sins insofar as it's not the best financial decision sometimes, but I love it. And for me, the use case is very strong. So I live down near London. We have our facility up in Oxfordshire. So I'm driving probably 75 miles each way in an EV, and quite frankly, never have to charge anywhere other than at home. So that works very, very well for me.
Was lucky enough last year to get one of the Porsche Experience Days at Silverstone in the Taycan, so had a lot of fun in there. I drove 911s for about 10 years.
Yes.
Back in the days. That'll come into some of the discussion that we're going to have a little bit later on. But talk to me specifically about the Everrati origin story then, please.
So, as I say, when I was looking at my next thing, really. So I built and sold 2 successful businesses. My friends would say, "Why didn't you retire?" And quite frankly, that was never on my cards personally. So I started looking at what else I could do, and the inspiration very much was the wedding of Harry and Meghan. My origin is I actually certainly for the last 10 years prior to their wedding had lived in Windsor, very close to Windsor Castle, and kind of saw this happening. Roll on till around mid to late 2019. I'd been then looking at, is there a way for me to invest in this space? And quite frankly, there weren't the companies out there that I felt were doing this in a way that was suitable. And by that, I mean, my background being tech and being FCA regulated technology, you have to get things right. And some of the experiences I had out there looking at other companies were not quite what I would say is correctly doing things. So set about forming the business. It wasn't long before we were talking to a number of potential partners and indeed hiring an engineering team, because I'm not an engineer. And then of course COVID hit. So we were in a position where we were about to launch our first car. And essentially we had to put things not quite on hold, but we had quite a few really, really strong people approach us, principally via LinkedIn, to say, "I love what you guys are doing." We put some sort of PR out there. And we managed to build an exceptional team very, very quickly. And most of those are still with us today.
Fantastic. So within the Everrati range, what models are you focusing on at the moment? Because you can pretty much take any vehicle of a certain age and convert it, but you haven't done that. You've kind of narrowed it down to a subset. Talk to me a little bit about that, please.
So we have developed what we call 3 to 4 core platforms. They're not skateboard, they are architectures for different models of vehicle. So our small 4x4 architecture, currently that's deployed in a Land Rover Series 2, Series 2A, Series 3. And that's been very, very good seller, if you like. We've got those around the world, certainly, and we can talk through some of our clients shortly. Mid-engine to mid to rear engine rear drive. So that kind of fits off your Porsche and your kind of supercar. So we have the Porsche 911, 964 and G-body. And then we have the GT40, which is a continuation chassis. So it's an official GT40 chassis, and it was the world's first GT40 EV. And then last but not least, our front engine rear drive architecture. And the first car we deployed that in is the Mercedes-Benz Pagoda. So again, you think that pretty much any car between the late 60s, probably right through to the 90s, from Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Jaguar, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, and others were all front engine rear drive. Plus, of course, the US muscle cars. That particular architecture is very relevant for virtually all of those. But initially, we've deployed that in the Mercedes Pagoda.
Sweet. Now, I want to come back and talk a little bit about the performance aspects of that and how the conversion either has positive or negative connotations, whichever that is. But let me just sort of go up a level and ask you a question. I'm not sure what sort of an answer is going to come out of this, but what's the Everrati conversion philosophy?
Yeah. So our philosophy is that we don't convert, which kind of is an odd one. Everything we do, we treat as a new vehicle program. So there are people out there that will just convert. They'll put a battery box in, they'll put a transmission and a motor. Sometimes they'll match a motor to an existing gearbox. My team is ex-McLaren, JLR, Bentley, Lotus, Rimac. I've got some of the best EV engineers and mechanical engineers, quite frankly, in the business. And it's partly why we only do the models we do, because each one takes between 6,000 and 7,000 hours to do the engineering. There is then 2,000 to 3,000 build sort of areas of documentation, testing, and then we have those in clients' hands internationally. So this isn't just converting. This is everything from, we worry about overall weight distribution, center of gravity, obviously performance, the dials, the switchgear, the air conditioning, things like heated seats, audio. So we are essentially creating an entirely redefined version of that car as an EV. And that really is what sets us apart. And that's been the philosophy from day one, because our clients tend to be cash rich, time poor. They are the wealthier of our society. These are individuals that are potentially able to buy anything they want, but they've chosen to commission a vehicle with us, as opposed to buy that brand new, whatever it might be, Rolls Royce or whatever. So it's a very considered journey. It takes around a year, sometimes 14 months to actually create their vehicle. But what they get is a better than new version of the vehicle they've chosen, that of course they can use in daily life, low emission zones, and with a conscience, because it's no longer emitting any particulates or indeed CO2.
Talk to me a little bit more about what's actually involved in the conversion process, because I've spoken to people who do quote unquote the traditional conversions. They take the car, they take out the drivetrain, they stick a battery in and a motor, and that's it. But you've got a far more detailed process around that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that for us, please?
Certainly, yeah. So let's take. We're actually working on a new program right now. So we'll be launching another sports car later this year. Now, what does that mean in practice? So we'll have our own vehicle, our own version of that. We will strip it right the way back. So first and foremost, we weigh that original vehicle, so we know the exact corner weights and also the center of gravity of how that car was designed back in the day, whether that was from Porsche or Mercedes-Benz or whoever it might have been. So we know the stats on what's the target for that. And if we can, and it is the case on one of our cars, we actually go below the original weight as opposed to above the original, even with all the batteries and motors. So we take that original vehicle. We then do all of the initial CAD design. So we'll take out the powertrain, we'll take out the gearbox, we'll take everything out of that vehicle, a full 3D scan. One vehicle we did recently for a Dubai-based client, which is part of our bespoke process, had 5.2 billion data points on that CAD. So that's that's the level we go to. Once we have that information, that is all processed. We have then a number of other systems that we can then demonstrate where each component is going to go in that vehicle. So it's not just does it fit, does it get it shoehorned? We don't touch the chassis. We're all about maintaining the originality, should I say, of that chassis. And that presents its own challenges because these weren't cars that were originally designed for an EV powertrain. So things like, where is that specific component going? How much does that inverter weigh? And therefore, how far back or forward does that need to go in the vehicle? So it's extremely detailed. And the CAD that we then come out with is the exact build version of what we will see in real life. And if you look at for example, some of our images on our website, you'll see the CAD of, let's say, the GT40, and it exactly mirrors, as you might imagine, how we then end up building that in real life. So that process takes some time, as you can imagine. And then we start the process of, let's be honest, buying in the right components. We buy components from people like Helix. Helix motors are the most power dense, some of the most power dense motors in the world. They power Formula E cars. They power the Lotus Evija hypercar. They power the Valkyrie hybrid. So these aren't motors you can just go and buy anywhere. We have a very specific process for that. We use McLaren applied silicon carbide inverters. These are best in class. So they're not items that most people could even access, let alone know how to program. And then we have our own software that essentially is the glue that fits it all together. So we pull that first mule vehicle together, and we have a test track up in Oxfordshire. And essentially, we do various elements of testing, sometimes thousands of miles of testing. Once we are happy that is a solution that we can then replicate, we then start to market that as a proposition. And thankfully, we get lots of very interesting clients come to us and say, I'd love one of those. So that in a very short space of time is the approximate journey. And when it comes to building the cars, each chassis that we get, let's say it is a Porsche 964, so a late 80s, early 90s car, that is taken all the way back to the chassis. It's entirely stripped of absolutely everything. It is obviously checked for completeness, for making sure it's 100% straight. If it's not straight, it goes on a select machine, which straightens the car and makes sure it's 100% straight. Treated for any areas that might need a big concern. And then it's entirely rebuilt up. In many ways, certainly in the Porsche, lots of carbon fiber panels, so composite panels, and then the car comes together, brand new paint, brand new interiors, brand new dials, switchgear, air conditioning systems, you name it, that make that as a car. And then what comes out of it, as I say, is a beautiful recreation or continuation really of what it was before, but something that people can genuinely use every day. And we do have clients using these every day, even though they have choices.
And when you've gone through all that time and effort and you've put all the different components in, What's the actual performance of the electrified version like compared with the original version?
So again, we are very mindful of how the original vehicle was designed. So we're not in the business of making these dangerous, quite frankly. So we generally speaking, and there is one exception to this, which is the Land Rover series, but generally speaking, we're within 10 to 20% of the top end of the performance of the original vehicle. So give you an example, a 280 SL Mercedes Pagoda, which is the largest engine, 2.8, is probably about half a second to a second quicker than that would have been to 60. So again, it's not, we're not here to make these dangerous, we're here to make them very, very usable. Of course, we also do upgrade the braking and the suspension so that it can handle that additional power. The Land Rover series is slightly different. Back in the day, that would whisk you to 60 in about 24 seconds. And that's really not appropriate for modern traffic, but we could make it silly fast. We didn't. 13 is the number on that one, 13 seconds to 60, which is still very slow by modern standards, but it's appropriate for that vehicle with the addition of power brakes, power steering, and making it clearly, therefore, a very, very usable daily driver.
And what about range? Because obviously you can make any electric vehicle have a long range if you put a big enough battery in, but obviously that's going to have weight implications, etc. So on the models that you produce, how does the range compare with what somebody who had an original petrol version would expect?
Yeah. So again, it depends on the vehicle, really. So if you look at, let's say, the Land Rover series, with the original petrol fuel tank only did about 150 miles. And quite frankly, you'd need a chiropractor with you anyway, because they're not the most comfortable vehicles in the world. Ours also does around 150 miles. So again, our clients tend to be people with, whether it's a country estate, it might be a beach house, it might be used in those types of environments. Our Porsche and our Pagoda are around 200 miles, which again is very usable. And as you'll know, I drive my Taycan Turbo S, not quite like I stole it, but generally speaking, in certain weathers, I don't get much more than 230, 240 miles in that anyway. So it's kind of within the bounds of what's usable. And again, I think the whole range thing, especially for our clients, is irrelevant. These are people that if they're going to go much further, they'll have a driver, quite frankly. And actually, this is about fun engagement and something that's beautiful to use on a daily basis. Generally speaking, people aren't doing more than 20, 30, 40 miles a day, usually anyway, in a commute. So again, our clients tend to either use it for that purpose or for fun, going out to a restaurant or wherever it might be. So these are not typically used for long journeys. And I think that's probably the case anyway. If you're spending on a petrol resto mod and, the likes of a Porsche, Eagle E-Type and various others, very few people are doing very, very long ranges of those anyway. So it's a very similar use case.
Again, almost philosophically, if we go back to the Porsches that you've focused on. Now, you've talked about the different platforms that you've got there. I mean, Porsche did say the 944 or the 928, and you've focused at the moment on the 911, and I think specifically the 964 variant of that.
That's right.
What was the reason for that? Why not go for any of the other Porsche models, or indeed any of the other models within the 911 range?
No, good question. So look, I mean, what we do is not for the faint-hearted in terms of cost. It is an expensive process. And what I would say is that the 964 specifically is one of the most popular 911s in all time. And the ceiling price of a 964 is very high. So let's take a special edition. It might be a turbo or other, right through to let's be honest, what Singer vehicle design do, and they're this kind of the ultimate resto mod when it comes to combustion. Those are trading for, in some cases, north of $1 million up to 1.52 million, depending on the version of that. So that is ceiling price that we are well within, but the point being that for a 964, there is a ceiling price that is very high, and therefore we operate within a certain kind of band of that. Similarly, with Mercedes Pagoda, you can look at combustion versions of that north of £300,000 to £400,000 for a very well restored vehicle. Again, we're in a similar mindset. So whereas if we'd gone for, say, a 944 or even a 928, the ceiling prices just aren't there. So, it would be far more difficult to justify. That said, we've actually had a number of people recently interested in a 928 because that specific model is getting a lot more popular amongst collectors and people who love that shape as well.
Notwithstanding what you just said about the Pagoda, were there other Mercedes models that you looked at when it came to choosing one of the Mercedes brand?
Yeah, there were, and I think that, I mean, the Pagoda is quite special to me personally. You know, my family have had them. Certainly, my uncle had an SL back in the day, so for me that was a very important car. But also, I think again of that genre of vehicles, as a launch car, that made the most sense out of all of the Mercedes we looked at. That said, the powertrain we have in that, and indeed the original combustion powertrain for that car is also relevant for a number of other Mercedes of that era. So actually, guess what might come next? You know, is another kind of Mercedes of that era, and we already have a powertrain pretty much ready to go for that. So actually, from that perspective, that was key. But again, the 964 again was a poster car to many people of a certain generation. And indeed, you know, that's been consistent with 911s throughout the years. So, yeah, we tend to go with the cars that we think people will aspire to. And certainly the Pagoda in the Mercedes range was the one that, you know, has proven us right. I mean, we launched that car at Pebble Beach, so Monterey Car Week in California last year. We've already agreed commissions. We say commissions, it's a very, very personal process to actually create a car with us. But yeah, we're almost in double figures already within 12 months, which, given what we do and given the process we go to, it's quite a high production number.
Now, I've spoken to people before about conversions, and one reaction I get a lot is it's blasphemous to take a classic car such as a 911 and remove its soul, the boxer engine, and replace it with an electric motor, and it's sacrilege.
Yeah.
How do you respond to comments such as those?
If it's not for you, I look forward to seeing you on your horse and trap in a few years' time. So that's the first thing. Look, the reality is we're not doing this to the holy grail cars. So, you know, I mentioned the 964 Turbo, you know, the RS. There's various cars out there that we would steer clear from. We use the 964s that actually are fairly unloved. They are the C2 Tiptronics. You know, they are not the cars that people would have necessarily aspired to. And of course, what we then do is take it back to the chassis and make it a beautiful wide body carbon fiber car. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say is that we are now creating an opportunity for these cars to be genuinely seen on the road every single day. We have a client in central San Francisco, and I mean, right in the center. He drives his car that we've created for him down to the Bay Area to his office most days. There is no way he would have used an original late 80s Porsche for that journey if it weren't electric. Again, we're now being, I suppose, the arbiters of that car that allows it to be used on a daily basis, and that's pretty common actually. We have a client in London who uses her Land Rover series on a daily basis. One of her reasons for commissioning the car was that within the certain districts of London where you're not actually allowed within 2 or 3 streets of a school unless it's a zero-emission vehicle, everybody else is in their i3s, their Tesla Model 3s, or whatever. She's the cool one, with the Land Rover series. So actually, I would say quite the opposite. You know, that Land Rover started life with plants growing out of it. It would have been entirely scrapped. So again, we've brought that back, and given it a new life. And don't get me wrong, we have been asked to do some quite weird and wonderful things. We were asked by a UAE-based client to do what was already $1 million Porsche, and we declined because we said that's a bit too special for us to start working on. But the point is, first and foremost, there will come a time where these cars can't be used anymore. And generally, bear in mind, these are cars, most of which don't have a catalytic converter, right? So they are not the kind of cars you want with you in a traffic jam, with your windows open. So we sold that. Secondly, they are fun, they're engaging. And thirdly, they wouldn't be seen on the road, quite frankly, if it wasn't for what we're doing to them. So yeah, that I think hopefully helps people. Just one last comment: we were at an event, a Porsche event, so you can imagine, some of them wanted to line us up and shoot us, but one guy next to us had a GT3. End of the event, drive off. He said previously, I really don't get it. I don't understand this. Within 15 minutes of leaving the event, he actually sent a WhatsApp to my colleague saying, "I get it now," because he just couldn't keep up with him onto the motorway. So that's a guy in a GT3. So yeah, they're a lot of fun, and we've certainly converted a lot of those skeptics already.
We've been talking now for 20 odd minutes and we've kind of skirted around the price issue, but you kind of mentioned it there. I think we do need to discuss it. Now, my understanding is that to do one of these, I have to, if it was me, I would have to supply you with a straight, rust-free and clean title donor vehicle to start with. And then you do all the stuff you need to do. And then you charge how much for a 911 964, for example?
So yeah, you're absolutely right. So generally speaking, one of the interesting stats, I suppose, is that one would assume we're working with people who've already got these cars. And interestingly, 90% of the people we're working with haven't already got that original car. So they've always promised themselves that 964 or that Pagoda or that Land Rover, but they wouldn't want it in its original form. And that's the difference with some of the people we're working with. They tend to be, a lot of them are climate aware, they're thought leaders, they're people that actually love the idea of a zero emissions car. They may have had Teslas. I mean, a lot of our clients are US, so they will have had Lucids and various others. But they are people that have that desire to create something from that is different and from new. So only 10% of our clients have had that original vehicle. We would then identify and help the client purchase that, what we call a donor car or a donor chassis. On the Porsche specifically, the price starts at about £330,000 plus taxes. And then plus, depending on options and various other things. Again, it's not for everybody, and I think it's fair to say, once people get into this journey, we've got people who want to do their second car with us, and we've got people who want to do various other things with us as well. So it becomes a very fairly exclusive right now club where people kind of get into that journey, and a lot of the enjoyment is the process. They genuinely see that what was a very unloved vehicle entirely redefined as a beautiful thing that happens to be now zero emissions and can be used every day.
I mean, it's interesting when you start to talk about prices like that, because for most people it's going to be, well, that's out of reach. But I was watching a video the other day of a guy who bought a second-hand Bugatti Veyron. He spent $1.4 million to buy it, and in his first year he did 4,000 miles, and he spent £40,000, dollars, maintaining it and servicing it. So, when you look at it from that point of view, the kind of money you're talking about, it's chump change, really, isn't
it? It's value for money. No, easy. No, we're very realistic. It's not for everybody. We're very fortunate. We have, so far appealed to some very interesting people, quite frankly, because they allow us to take what is program on that has a lot of moving parts, and no pun intended. It's taking an original vehicle, completely re-engineering that, and creating something that is now they can take to car shows, they can take to events, and be a talking point. Is a long process, but the great thing is it can be a very bespoke process. We've got people who are looking at creating. I was up in Scotland a couple of weeks ago launching one of our cars, creating a very specific pattern that appeals to their family, very completely unique for the interior of one of their cars. And these are the kinds of level of bespoke that we can go to, which you wouldn't get from a modern day manufacturer, but we can go to those lengths, obviously. And yes, it's not inexpensive by any means. But certainly the cars that we have, I mean, the really interesting thing so far as well is that because we have a lead time, there becomes a supply and demand issue. So we have one or two clients now that want to get their second Everrati and maybe move on their first. They're actually going to achieve more than they paid for it when they move that on. So which can't be said for all EVs, it's fair to say.
Indeed. Now, you've already mentioned a couple of clients sort of generically. Is your main market the US? Is it the Middle East? Is it Far East? Or is it kind of evenly split?
Thus far, the main market has been the US. About 70% of 78% of all our inquiries are US, and that mirrors really where the clients are. We have some great clients here in the UK, some in Western Europe, and then we have quite a lot of interest so far from the Middle East. No delivered cars yet, but we have interest from the Middle East. The US is such a big market. California is the fourth largest economy in the world. We have clients in North America, right from Vancouver, Washington State, quite a few in California, Texas, Florida, and then up in places like New York State, the Hamptons, those kind of areas. So it tends to be very, very US heavy in terms of the client base. I think the great thing about about that particular element for us is that we already build our cars, certainly the Porsches in the United States, they're actually entirely built and manufactured or recreated there. So that actually helps hugely with it when it comes to things like tariffs and other things that unfortunately are a big reality in our world today.
You've kind of preempted one of my questions there on tariffs, so I'll jump over that. One of the quote unquote issues with selling cars in a price bracket like this was sort of exemplified by Rory Sutherland, who you may have encountered, ex-Ogilvy. And he said that with companies like, the Bentleys and the Rolls Royces, they stopped going to car shows and trying to sell vehicles there. They went to yacht shows and things like that. Because, if you're looking at 3, 4, 5 million for a yacht, then $500,000 for a Rolls Royce is chump change, really. Is that the kind of strategy that you're employing for marketing the vehicles?
It is to a point. So you're absolutely right. Whilst we love being at a generic show, and I say generic, but shows that anybody can attend. Yes, it might cost money. That's great for brand building, and actually we love it when that someone's daughter or son wants to get in the car and have some photos taken. That for me is really important, because actually that helps with the brand build and get some people that wouldn't normally see our brand and therefore get to know who we are. But absolutely, when it comes to exposing our brand, it tends to be in places where people go, and it is, as you say, it might be yacht shows, it might be art events, or it might be the very, very high end car events, such as Monterey Car Week. So I'm off tomorrow, actually. Yeah, where are we? Tomorrow I'll fly out to LA and I'll be in Monterey for Car Week. And that is, if you don't know, is Pebble Beach Concours, it's the Quail, there's a lot of different events over the week. And genuinely some of the most wealthy car collectors in the world will be there. We do things like Moda Miami. We do the Bridge in Hampton. So these are very, very high-end car events. But absolutely, just yesterday I was talking about our presence at Monaco Yacht Show in September. So again, it tends to be places where, as you rightly say, people are spending either millions, if not tens of millions, at somewhere like Monaco. And the addition of one of our cars is probably what they're paying for their scatter cushions for their rear deck. So actually, it tends to be a different clientele, and therefore value for money relatively is high.
Now, I've sat in one of your 964 conversions, the one that you have with the Gulf thing. I was at I think it was an Instavolt event at Stroud Park in Banbury a couple of years ago. So I've got the photo of me in the driver's seat there. Now, as a 964 driver myself for many years, I immediately felt right at home when I got back in there. The sense memory came back. It all felt very familiar. And I know you tried to keep everything as close as possible to what it was in the original vehicle. But are there situations in vehicles that you've addressed where perhaps that hasn't been possible?
That's a good question. So we do try to improve wherever we can without, again, ruining anything. So it's fairly well known. The pedal box on a Land Rover series is very awkward to use, and you can get very, very painful shins if you do use it for too long. So again, we use a slightly different approach there. But generally speaking, we try and make them as familiar as possible. To the untrained eye, we like like them to look like they just are a beautifully restored version of their original self. But then when it comes to things like dials and gauges, again, the Porsche dials look virtually identical. They just happen to have kilowatt hours rather than RPM. And then things like our Pagoda dials, they are a work of art. They look like a watch face because that's what's relevant and appropriate for that particular car. So there are circumstances. What I would say the big things are, again, trying to get switchgear that looks original, things like the gear shifter on the Pagoda, right through to air conditioning systems. Some of these cars never really had, or certainly didn't have very good air conditioning, but now using electronic heating and air conditioning, which again needs to be packaged correctly, but again, something that is then very, very usable because of course we can't rely on the combustion engine to power that anymore. So those kinds of things are surprisingly complex, actually.
Now, a typical 911, or at least the ones that I drove, tended to be fairly tail happy in certain situations because you've got this big flat six boxer engine hanging way back behind the rear wheels. Now, in a conversion, you have the opportunity to alter that tendency by judicious placement of batteries and motors. Is that something you consider, or do you tend to keep the driving experiences close?
It's interesting. So if you read some of the reviews, whether it's some of the motoring journalists, so Top Gear and various others, obviously we're very limited with packaging space. But actually, if you look at our 911, the weight is ever so slightly inboard from where it would have been. So actually, arguably, it drives a bit more like a Cayman, for argument's sake, than an original 911. So it's a lot more predictable. And of course, the power delivery is a lot more predictable. 964 turbo back in the day, I had a friend that very proudly had one for about three weeks before we put it in a ditch. That is was one of the challenges back in the day. We now have a vehicle that looks virtually identical, but is very much more straightforward to drive and straightforward to get performance out of. And I think that's another thing is if you've got one of these beautiful cars, you don't really want to be revving it and risking damaging it. With an EV powertrain, you don't need to do any of that. So it's a very different experience.
Yeah, I've got to say my last 911 did end up in a ditch, unfortunately, and ended up as a three-wheeler, which was a little bit unfortunate. I ran out of talent in the wet, shall we say.
No, that happens, unfortunately.
That does bring up the next question, which is, what are the insurance implications on vehicles just such as this? Are they considered to be conversions, or are they considered to be standalone vehicles that are insured as standalone vehicles?
So to date, the insurance industry has been pretty good actually with us. So I think, again, our clients tend to have more than one car. So they might already have a multi-car policy that they're insuring with people like Haggerty and some of the other sort of bigger specialist insurers generally anyway. And because we do things the way we do them, which is we're very conscious about weight, overall performance. This is still on the original VIN, so it's still let's say a 90s or early 90s 911. We change the car to a point where it's still within what the DVLA, if you did it in the UK, would call radically altered. So it doesn't exceed the point system. That would then become a problem because you talk about things like Q plates on a car. You are talking about things that are not an area that we would wish to go into. But generally speaking, all that happens is the DVLA or the DMV in the US or wherever it might be will inspect the car. They'll note that it is changed to EV, so they'll just change the fuel type on the registration documents. And then really it's just a conversation with the insurer about value. But generally speaking, these are pretty straightforward to insure, depending on the insurer. I don't think we've had anybody, phone up or go online to a price comparison site and try to insure one, but these tend to be a bit more specialist than that.
Fantastic. You've done the 911, you've done the Land Rover, you've done the Mercedes Pagoda. You did sort of hint earlier that there's another one in the in the pipeline. I don't know whether you want to share that, but if you don't, I have another sort of ancillary question, which is, I have a neighbour with a classic E-Type Jaguar. Lovely car, convertible, yellow. Fantastic vehicle, but it takes him 30 seconds of cranking the engine to get it started, and then another 3 or 4 minutes of pumping the gas pedal to get heat into it before it can take it out. And there's lots of noise and pollution. For a car he drives maybe 15 times per year, is an E-Type the kind of thing that you might be considering in future?
It certainly is. Given what I said about the front engine rear drive architecture for the Pagoda, and because that is so compact as a powertrain, so again, I mentioned the likes of a Helix motor, the fact that they're power dense is more importantly that they are small. So effectively we can fit that within let's say a transmission tunnel. So whilst E-Type isn't necessarily on the list, it absolutely is one that we've had various inquiries on in the recent past. So absolutely, on paper we can absolutely do the likes of an E-Type. Anything's technically possible. It's down to time and money, as I say. You might assume correctly that the 911 we do today is a certain type. What was the evolution of that car? Well, the next gen of that is something that we may well be bringing out very shortly. So that is kind of where we go. So it's about evolution. It's about getting the best technologies we possibly can in our machines. Quite frankly, as I say, we're very, very fortunate because my team is the likes of Rimac and Bentley, JLR, McLaren, Lotus. We have very, very strong connections that allow us to then procure the best-in-class technologies, and of course that then really does set us apart. So it's an exciting space, and what I would say is, despite the market for many we're probably 3 or 4 times up on sales than we were last year, already this year. So we're in a really interesting niche, and one that we're very, very fortunate that we're kind of one of the leading brands in the space.
Picking up on what you just said there about some of the people who are working for you, and what their backgrounds are, given that the offerings that you have as a company are well outside the price range of a large majority of the listeners to this podcast, I then look and say, well, yeah, but so are things like Formula One cars. But with Formula One, the tech tends to trickle down to road cars over the year. ABS is a big example of that. Is there anything in the tech or the process that you use that you can see trickling down to some of the lower priced or more affordable conversions, or even, the actual vehicles that have been built that people might want to make moving forward?
Yeah, look, I mean, so what we're known for today is the cars that we've already described, so the cars that you see on our website. Underpinning that, however, is, I would argue, one of the best EV integration teams certainly available. And of course, we're then making that whole kind of package available to third parties. So there are a number of new vehicles in development that might be sports cars, that might be GT cars, that might be 4x4s. We are actually talking to those companies and about being the powertrain supplier to those organizations. So we have 4 or 5 very, very large projects for us going into the next year, where again, we're using all of that experience. Now, that also includes things like our own vehicle control software, where we're developing different functionality there that would otherwise cost a manufacturer potentially 10 million plus to develop and deploy. We're making that available within our own platforms for others to use. So that's really, on the business side, that's where the company's going. And therefore, I suppose the key thing there is using the agility of a company like Everrati to then allow third parties to develop their cars in a way that would be far more cost efficient and time efficient than it would be going to a larger player. And also, most of these larger players wouldn't even talk to them, quite frankly. So we're kind of in a fairly unique space there.
Is there anything else you'd like the viewers to know about you or your company or your products that we haven't actually covered?
Look, I think we love the opportunity to do things like this, Gary. So thank you for that. I think as much as anything, love of cars is a huge thing. It's a huge passion, certainly for us in our business. I would say just try and be open minded. And what I would say is we very recently launched our brand book, which people can go onto our website everrati.com and find the brand book, and you can actually read a copy of that completely free of charge just by previewing the book. And it gives a lot more of the history and the story of our company. So what I would say is, if people are interested, we'd love people to come and read that. And we'd love then to show people cars, whether it's at an event or something else, because what I think is really important is that, we are bringing these cars back into an era where they can be used on a daily basis. And I think the real shame is a lot of them can't today, due to emissions and due to, quite frankly, the way that the world is going. So I think, as much as anything, come find out about us, and we love to take people through that journey and understand who we are.
Justin Lunny, thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Gary.
So what are the takeaways from this? Well, the first thing is that while everybody likes to drive around in a brand new electric car, or even a slightly older pre-owned EV, there's still a proportion of the driving population that love their classic cars. For a lot of people, it means keeping the engines running, racing them at weekends, or even taking them out for a Sunday drive from time to time. But there is a proportion of the population that want the best of both worlds: a classic car converted to electric. Now, we covered classic car conversions already with Richard Morgan of Electric Classic Cars in episode 156. These are conversions where he takes an existing vehicle, rips out the drivetrain, adds in the motors, batteries, and electrical control gubbins, and gives you the same car, but electrified. And that's not what Everrati do. As Justin said in the video, they take the basic car, which has to meet certain criteria, and literally build you a brand new version of that, but one which is fully electrified. Yes, the cost of something like this is much, much higher than the cost of a quote-unquote normal conversion, but it's a completely different animal. What particularly appealed to me is that machines such as this are being sought by people who, with great wealth and a commensurate large carbon footprint, are actively seeking older cars to use as base models. Justin mentioned that 90% of clients don't already have a donor car. He also mentioned that He has clients who are looking for the second Everrati. So reuse and repeat business. Now, I've said all along that I wouldn't go back to an internal combustion engine vehicle unless I was forced to do so. But I did love driving the 911s when I had them. So fingers crossed for this week's lottery numbers. If they come through and I get the Everrati, you're all invited to ride in it. And you'll notice I said ride, not drive. It's time for a cool EV or renewable thing to share with you listeners. June 2025 was extremely hot in many places in Europe, but particularly in Spain, breaking temperature records and causing many heat-related deaths. One factor built into that is that urban areas with lots of tarmac and concrete tend to have higher temperatures than rural areas with trees, etc. But that doesn't mean you can't find shade. A new app called Shade Map shows where city streets have shade at any time, helping people avoid the sun. It's a 3D map that could put you anywhere in the world to visually show the building shadows on the street at any time and any day for free. For a bit of money, you can also see the shade projected by terrain and actual trees captured with aerial LiDAR, the laser sensor that creates three-dimensional maps of the world. Pretty cool, and something that will become more and more important as we move forward on a warming planet. The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. See what charge points are available right now with live availability and unrivaled UK charge point coverage at your fingertips. Pay at thousands of charge points within the app or with the ZapMap charging card. Join over 1 million EV drivers, download ZapMap and charge with confidence. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's show. It was put together this week with the help of Justin Lunny from Everrati. Many thanks to him for his time. If you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. On the socials, I'm on Blue Sky at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm also on Instagram at evmusings, where I post short videos and podcast extracts regularly. Why not follow me there? Thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on a monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc one. If you enjoyed this episode, why not buy me a coffee? Go to coffee.com/evmusings and you can do just that. ko-fi.com/evmusings. Takes Apple Pay too. Regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks, So You've Gone Electric and So You've Gone Renewable. They're 99p each or equivalent, and you can get them on Amazon. Check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my regular EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now, I know you're probably driving or walking or jogging now, but if you can remember, and you enjoyed this episode, drop a review in iTunes, please. It really helps me out. If you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by messaging me at musingsev.bsky.social with the words, not a kit car. Hashtag, if you know, you know, nothing else. Thanks as always to my co-founder, Simon. You know, he can get a little militant at times, especially when people question whether the electric unicycle is the best mode of transport. But he has a great comeback to anyone saying that to him.
If it's not for you, I look forward to seeing you on your horse and trap in a few years' time.
Thanks for listening. Bye.